This is the Marketing Made Easy for HR Consultants podcast, a show to help independent UK-based HR consultants get a pipeline of perfect fit, high-paying clients without expensive adverts, time-consuming social media activities, or energy-sapping and monotonous networking meetings. I'm your host, Nick Paninsky, author of How to Land Your Dream Client, a book which explains everything you need to know to get every sale and client you ever want. And if that sounds interesting, then make sure to grab your copy from the influential consultant website today. That being said, let's get into today's show.
Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Made Easy for HR Consultants with me, Nick Paninsky. Today we are joined by Natalie Ellis of Rebox HR. And I said Rebox, I meant Rebox HR. So Natalie, if you want to give us a quick introduction to who you are, what you do, give us your elevator pitch.
Okay, so I started Rebox HR, so I'm the managing director of the company and have been since 2020 when I started it essentially from my living room. And yeah, I've spent the last 20 or nearly 20 years, showing my age now a little bit there, Nick. So I started my HR career back in 2006 when I was working for Wildest Group. So I was there at the start and, towards the end of the collapse of the group. So that's where I gained a lot of my commercial awareness from. So I come at HR from a very commercial angle rather than a kind of people function type angle. So it's just HR done a little bit differently, I suppose.
Excellent. I like that. And yeah, we're going to get you on. We've just been talking, but obviously we're going to get you on next time to talk about how HR should be done in your perspective, because that'll help our listeners if they're wanting some tips on how to be the best HR consultant they can be, then maybe you can help them out. But for today, we are going to talk about your podcasts, because I keep seeing videos in my LinkedIn feed and I keep seeing all the likes and I keep thinking to myself, what is this? So, and yeah, funnily enough, because it talks about HR and I don't work in HR, I've not paid too much attention. So let's talk to me and anyone else who hasn't managed to listen to you. What is this podcast of yours with all these thousands of listeners?
Okay, so HR Unboxed is the podcast, and it was a completely accidental concept, if I'm being completely honest with you. And I find that those are probably the most interesting factors. Whenever you're doing something, it has to be done with complete authenticity. And, you know, the podcast isn't scripted. It's not pre-recorded, it's not rehearsed. It is one of those where Faye and I will just turn up at the studio in Milton Keynes and we will just go, right, this is the subject matter, and our producer Chris Gregg will just ask us questions that he feels are the right ones to ask. And Chris just has a natural flair and interest in the HR stories that we have to share on that podcast. So it's across all of the major platforms, and we do film it for the channel on YouTube as well. So that's where you're seeing all of those videos pop up, Nick.
Yes.
And what we do is we talk about a number of different things. So we'll know the subject matter before we go in. And the one that we've just completed filming was the HR Confessions, which was when employees wrote into us. They wrote into us and they told us exactly what it is that they wanted to confess in terms of they didn't want their own HR people to know. And some of them were clean enough to air. Others we unfortunately had to put to one side, as you can imagine. There's a vetting process on those particular confessions. So again, I turned up to the studio. I'd emailed Chris the confessions that morning and he had them, and he hadn't even had a chance to read them before we got to the studio. So all of the reactions from Faye, Chris and I, they are all real. We don't, as I said, we don't edit the podcast. There's no cutting or editing involved. We want it to be completely authentic. So when we put the show out initially, Faye and I had no idea how popular it was going to be. So we've just hit 35,000 downloads on the platforms, which is insane. And we made page 1 of Spotify as well, which was quite an incredible achievement. Yeah, we don't know. We're not, the only marketing and things like that we do is what you see from Faye and I on LinkedIn. We don't have a PR agency behind us. We don't have everything we do is authentically us. And that's what we will continue to kind of bring to the show. And the next show that we're filming is we're doing that early March. So we'll be filming the next episode. And that is around initially grievances, and some of the things we do talk about is what is actually going on in the world of HR as well. So there is a bit of everything going in at the moment, and especially with how interesting the tribunals environment is at the moment and the types of rulings that we're seeing. So, yeah, lots to talk about. We're never out of content.
No, absolutely not. I love that. So let's circle back 1 minute, though. You had to do some vetting because it's a live show, right? It goes out on the radio or something?
Yes. So Horizon Radio that's our home. We call it the home of HR Unboxed. And yes, so the one thing that we have in that process, we keep it clean. So we don't want to... I mean, some of the stories that we got for the HR Confessions episode were really graphic.
Wow.
To the point where it made me cringe. And I'm quite open-minded, to be honest with you, Nick. So we said, right, we can probably change a couple of bits here, but we won't be able to change that part. So, yeah, some of the bits we did have to kind of vet to make sure that it was for the show, because funny enough, we actually have quite a lot of young listeners as well, which is something we completely unexpected. So there's
when you say young, you don't mean children, do you? You mean students?
We have the student, obviously some students listen in to the show. It's mostly HR professionals, but unexpectedly Faye's daughter Nevaeh, she is in her second year of secondary school, and her friends all found our picture, our thumbnail on Spotify, and they've all of a sudden said, "Oh, Nevaeh, is this your mum?" So Faye has now become the most popular mum at the school, and they tune in every episode. So they're asking Faye, when's the next episode? And they're also really interested in how we produce the podcast, because it's a very kind of what I'd call a trendy thing to do. It's not something I thought I would be doing, but they said it's a very trendy thing to do, but they're genuinely interested on how all of the technology works, how we generate that content, and, ultimately how we then put the show out there to Spotify. I can't say or take any credit for any of it, because Chris does all of that for us. Faye and I are really lucky that we just get to turn up, we talk on the microphones and do the filming, and then we wait for the next month to roll around and then do it all again. So initially we were going to do it as a trial. Yeah. Chris has been badgering me to do a podcast on my own for years, and I just said to him, no, it's really not me. I'm quite happy going on the speaker circuit and doing all of those bits and pieces, which is lovely, because you're face to face with people. When you are in a studio and you're essentially talking amongst a group of, but I'll call them friends, because it is a friendship group. We feel quite comfortable enough to have the discussions around what is actually going on and how we produce a show to the standard that we expect. So if it became scripted, or it became, oh, can you do this, or can you, it just feels a little bit too rigid, and it takes away that authenticity. So when people meet Faye and I in real life, some people do come to the studio and they give us a wave and things like that. It's lovely, and they say, "Oh gosh, you're just like you are in, on the show in real life." So that's the
like a celebrity. No,
it's the effect that we have, and people do think yeah, we do get approached a lot for selfies and things like that. So it's quite, it's quite nice to meet people, but also to bring what's seen as quite a stuffy subject to most people, because HR is very transactional. So you find that you only go there if you've got a query about your holiday pay, or if you've got a query about something. Do you know what I mean? People only have a very short experience of HR, whereas if you open that door and people actually see what goes on behind it, they're really interested. So that's why Chris gets so excited when we talk on the podcast about certain subjects. He's like, oh, tell me more about that. And he is genuinely interested, which helps. So, yeah, I couldn't wish for a better team to be working with on that producing of the show. And as I said, initially it was just an idea from Chris. And within 3 minutes, we'd already come up with the name. We were going to call it Unboxing HR because we wanted to keep it in line with the Rebox theme. But then we just thought HR Unboxed. It just sounds good. So we thought we're going to roll with that. And people do really engage with it. So we get lots of comments on our LinkedIn page and on the feed on YouTube and all sorts. So we're really lucky to have received the support and appreciation for the show that we have.
No, yeah. As I say, it keeps blowing up in my LinkedIn feed. It's dragged attention. It's really interesting. I just started listening to a podcast which talks about how to make your podcast more popular, get more downloads or whatever. And like the cardinal rule, the number one rule that they have is like, don't bother posting little clips on social media or whatever. And because generally speaking, that's not how people find podcasts, between me and you, right? I don't know what podcasts you listen to, but the podcasts I found, I didn't find them because I saw a clip on YouTube Shorts or whatever. But here we are talking because I've seen your little clip. And so that's interesting. It's I guess the exceptions prove the rule, right?
Sometimes. And I think, again, it's about doing things that feel good to you, because if you do something because somebody's told you on, I call it Dr. TikTok, if it tells you to do something, what works for one person doesn't work for another. So the best way that Faye and I come across is when people speak to us. So when Chris approached us last year and said, come on, Nat, it's time. And then he met Faye and said, actually, I don't think this should be a solo project. Faye was really against it. She really didn't want to do it. No. And I've never seen Faye so nervous before. So I said, look, just come along. I can do the introductory episode and then we can record the second one together, because then at that point you've seen it and we can do it.
Yeah.
So we were going to do a pilot episode solo. And I just thought, it doesn't feel right with Faye just being sat there. So Chris, he didn't physically grab her because we don't do that in HR.
Also, what to say? What happened?
He plonked her onto the chair and said, right, okay, let's test your microphone and everything else. Faye was literally shaking like a leaf. But if you see the difference in the first episode dynamic, because we were expecting a couple of hundred people to listen. And when Chris then said by episode 3, that we'd had over 10,000 downloads, we were sat there going, okay, that's nuts. The Christmas episode is the one that's performed the most. And
the secrets, the confessions?
This was the Christmas party episode.
Okay. Yeah.
So people really enjoyed what actually happens in sorts of cases that we've had to work on over the years when it comes to Christmas parties. And to put it in perspective, Faye and I are still managing cases and fallouts from Christmas parties now, and we're just about to hit March.
Jesus.
So, yes, the fallout is real, but a lot of the time businesses don't take that time to protect themselves. So what we're doing is bringing HR to life in a way that they can relate to.
Yeah.
It's got to a point, we're really lucky because Chris has been approached now so many times and said, can you produce a show like HR Unboxed, but for my company, which is a solicitor's firm is one of them. There's an accountancy practice that want to come into the studio to watch us record so that they can then muster the courage to go out there on their own. So we're actually we're inspiring other people. Everyone's got something to share. So we're inspiring people to create something of their own, but not be ashamed of showing a bit of personality, because if you just go in there, and if I sat in there in a suit in typical HR fashion, shall we call it, and I go, well, you can't do this, and policy says this, and policy says that, people are just going to switch off. If you've got something, the dynamic with Faye and I is quite unique. So Faye is employed by me full time. She's not a partner in the business. The business is solely mine. So when I'm talking to people about producing them themselves, I'm like, find what where your dynamic sits, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. So, as I said, I'm in a really fortunate position where I'm able to kind of get Faye to go out and do something that she initially wasn't comfortable with. It's the one thing we look forward to doing every single month. We take a day out of the business together. We'll go for a nice lunch. We'll get our Starbucks. You've probably seen that. That's our pre-recording rituals. We'll go to Starbucks. And it's got to a point where the staff in Starbucks now go, oh, another one, is it? Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
So it's really, really nice. But I think people relate to us with the whole trials and tribulations of employing people and the unique situations that can bring. So, yeah, that's pretty much HR Unboxed in a nutshell.
I like it.
Yeah.
There's I'm only going to deviate slightly, just to bring in a little bit about what you said about into a marketing and sales capacity. You said what works for one person doesn't work for another, and I love that, because that's applicable in your life. And from a marketing and sales perspective, I would say to people, from a lead gen perspective, because everyone online talks about networking or posting on LinkedIn, that method of lead gen only works if you want to do it. Whereas what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. If you don't want to do networking or LinkedIn, you don't have to. So that is an example. And I'm only going to touch on it because today's episode is not about marketing and sales. It's more about being the best HR consultant you can be. But obviously, there's an element of that. But let's go back to what you were saying earlier, because I'm going to bring in, why you're doing your show in a second, because I am curious about that. But I do want to go back. Earlier on when you were talking about having to vet certain confessions. You don't have to vet anything here. I drop F-bombs all the time. Let's hear some of these sordid stories. Let's hear one. What was it? Sex? Was it drugs? Was it rock and roll?
Yes, it was a lot of sexual content.
Amazing.
And I will be honest with you, Nick, during my HR career, I've caught people in the act 5 times.
What?
There are things that I cannot unsee, and I really wish I could.
Flipping heck.
It does. I mean, in all of these situations, I'm trying to be helpful. And it's...
Wait. How are you trying to be helpful?
I just walk in at the wrong time. So for years, I refer to myself as the Bridget Jones of HR, because if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen to me. We had Christmas parties that have got out of hand where people have then decided to take the party into the reception area of the hotel that we were having the event in. And there's all sorts of things that we come up against that we can't unsee, but there's also a way of... The reason that we have to vet some of them is because it would be too obvious either what the company was, who the individual is, but some of them were quite light-hearted. I mean, there was one that we were dealing with that was on the episode, which was surrounding some WhatsApp exchanges and Snapchat imagery. So, yeah, the amount of cases that Faye and I handle that are in relation to either Snapchat gone wrong or managing directors getting pictures that they shouldn't be getting from members of staff for various reasons. It's all very complicated when you're dealing with people. So you always have to have this kind of air about what you want to place onto the episode and what you don't. It was the first time we've done anything like that around confessions, but it's been so popular and people are still throwing confessions over to us. Kind of like a HR agony on almost. But
Amazing.
It's really great that we've got that amount of people engaging with what we're doing, because they don't want to know about the policies. They want to know about what is going wrong and how we essentially have to work in the way that which we work. So it's really so that's what I mean by the whole vetting process.
Yeah.
You can't have I'm very aware of legal liabilities and things that we have on the podcast, and I'm very aware of those sorts of things. So it's
after the show, once we've stopped recording, that's when you'll tell me.
I'll spell the tea. But yeah, I think that's the other thing, is that people get involved with what we call the HR spilling of tea, and that's why Faye and I have the mugs in our thumbnail. That's why we're never seen without a
Starbucks
coffee or a Starbucks or whatever it is. Other coffee shops are available, but it's just so happens to be opposite the studio. So otherwise, we've got to go all the way to the other side of Milton Keynes Shopping Centre if you want something else. So it's great. But, you know, as I said, these opportunities don't present themselves to you. When I first met Chris, it was my second week of trading in my business. I just left my very well paid career to go and do this on my own. And any of your listeners will go, oh my gosh, I can relate. And I was sat in this meeting, a networking meeting, and Chris just came up to me. He wasn't working for the radio station at that point. He was actually working for a charity. And you know, when you just click with someone and you're like, now's not the right time for us to work together, but there is going to be a time. And I'm very in tune with that gut instinct. Everything that I do in terms of either the business, the podcast, or any other opportunities that I'm currently building is that if I don't go on, if my gut doesn't feel right, it's not the time. So when I met Chris, I knew there was a complete connection, you know, professional connection there. So I was sat there and I said, I've got to work with this guy, but I'm not sure in which capacity yet. But the opportunity will present itself to me. Fast forward 5 years later, Chris has stood in front of me and said, right, now it's time. And then it just all gelled with Faye being in the studio as well. So the theme around it is the show is designed to be like a cup of tea with friends. It's not there to do things. And we've had people email in and say, I didn't know I couldn't do that particular thing. So we had one chap, he said to us, oh, my girlfriend was going to go off sick because she'd been denied holiday. And we said, yeah. And he said, I found out about pre-planned unauthorized absence from your podcast. And we then worked a way to get a compromise with her employer. So it doesn't have to be what the things that we think that we just do on the day-to-day that everybody knows about. We don't. So when we're talking about these subjects and really bringing these real scenarios together, people relate to it and they understand it. So it's the amount of comments we get where we're like, oh no, can we just talk about your episode first? So Faye and I went to a meeting where we were met this lovely lady at a networking event, and she didn't have a clue what we did, but then we did a follow-up and we sat down.
She didn't know who you were. Flipping heck.
No, it was in like the HR side of things. She knew that we did HR. She doesn't understand how HR fits into her company, because at the moment she's thinking about employing her first person and stuff. So she sat down with us and she goes, can we just talk about episode 5 right now? And I was like, okay, we could talk about that. So we were sat in this coffee shop and people were just like, oh, really? So it was very interesting because Faye and I are now very quickly being known for the podcast. But the good thing for us in terms of a marketing perspective and what you were touching on earlier, HR and marketing goes together like tea and biscuits. And I wrote about this years ago with a wonderful lady who was on The Apprentice, Rebecca Jeffrey. And Rebecca and I met on what used to be called Twitter, and we've spoken for years. And I was in one of the shortlisting processes for The Apprentice, so many, many years ago, 2013. So it was a long time ago.
Yes, a dozen years ago, flipping
it was a lot of years ago. And
how old were you then? 20 or something?
I'm just about to turn 41, Nick.
Wow, we're the same age.
It just the years seem to have absolutely flown by. And
tell me about it.
So I was speaking to Rebecca about HR and how it fits in with her business and everything else. And she was like, well, actually, HR is no different to marketing. She said, essentially, it goes together because if you put HR department on its own, it's nothing. If you put a marketing department on its own, there's nothing to market. You have to have each other and appreciate each other's differences and dynamics, even if you're in a large corporate, So when I worked for large corporate businesses, the last function you saw me in was HR. I got to know the rest of that business first before I knew how to contribute to it. And that's a very different way of learning what that looks like. But a lot of the ways that I work are based on what we call Danish principles, is that it's a collaboration and a true collaboration. It's not, can you go and get that checked by finance or something like that. There's a lot more to it. The better you know your people, the better equipped you are to be able to deliver a level of value. And it's no different in marketing, because when you are going through or marketing your HR consultancy and things like that, I've never outsourced it, but I've had digital marketing agencies as clients that have said, who's doing your marketing? Because it's really quite hitting the mark. And I said to them, well, actually, no one. It is Faye and I, or it just comes. I sit every Sunday is my job, and I sit there every Sunday afternoon with, in my living room, and I will sit there and schedule the week's content. I do all of that. And I pull it together and I see what kind of themes are going on, if there's particular cases of interest, all that stuff. And I'll sit there and I will work solidly that Sunday afternoon to deliver that level of content. And that's all my blogs, that's LinkedIn articles, that's everything. I do it all myself. So when I'm sat there and I'm going, so I do it all myself. And it's good because the digital marketing professionals that have spoken to me have said to me, whatever you do, do not outsource it to anyone, because you are presenting it in the way that it deserves to be presented in, and that cannot be replicated. So when you've got HR consultants as a broad term, we're all different. We're all unique. You can't go out there and say, I want to be the next, I don't know, Peninsula or things like that, because their model suits them. But that model doesn't suit us, and it certainly doesn't suit clients. So,
they've got a different budget. They've got different goals.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it's about embracing what that looks like to you. Now, realistically, I could have a team of 10 if I wanted to, but I don't, because I think it would dilute really what we offer. People like to ring through. They like to have that comfort of speaking to Faye and I, and they trust us to do the job. If I started recruiting more and more and more people, yes, the plan is to obviously recruit more people, because there's only one of me that can deliver certain things. So one of those principles there is to make sure that you've then got the right person to come in and complement you. So we don't outsource to associates or anything like that. I won't do it. And the reason that we don't do it is not because we don't want to kind of share that. It's purely because our clients know, like, and trust us. And maintaining that relationship is key, and it is our essential part of our strategy. So without giving away too much of the secret sauce, essentially that's what it looks like. So all I can say to people is to make sure that you are embracing what you bring and not what you think you should bring, because they're two very different things.
Yeah, I love that. I was saying that to someone yesterday who she wanted to do lumpy mail campaign. And I was like, if that's what you want to do, then let's do it. That makes sense. So forget about posting on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever. If that's not your bag, that's not your bag.
No.
Okay.
You don't have to do TikTok dances and things like that to impress people. You can actually deliver what you deliver in your own unique way. And for us, HR Unboxed is like a therapy session. We're able to just download to Chris. What you see is what you get when we're just turning up and having a blooming good time. So if anyone is thinking of starting a podcast, or if they are concerned about doing TikTok dances, or that they think they should be doing something, think about how you bring things, or when you win a client is the best way I can explain it. When you win a client, how did you win that client? Was it through the quality of the conversation? Was it because you showed up and you were your best self on that day? Or did you try and pretend to be someone else as part of that process? If you really drill it down, you can learn so much from that reflective piece that you can then really own your craft, so to speak. And that's what you bring. So don't think you have to go out there and do podcasts or dances or anything like that. You can be yourself and present yourself in a way that really demonstrates what value you can bring. And that's the whole point.
Love it.
There we go. Powerful stuff here, Nick.
No, I like it. We've diverted a little bit away from our topic of your podcast, but I think it's gone in a good direction for my audience, in terms of check out Natalie's podcast. It's a great resource. You might learn a few things. You might have a good giggle, but equally, here's some of Natalie's tips about growing a business. So, yeah, a double whammy for the listeners.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for that. I guess we've got about 5 minutes left, I think, because we were both saying before this how we've got a hard stop. We've both got to finish. So, I guess you've kind of answered why you're doing the show, right? It's. I mean, if you can, it's to shine a light on everything that HR does, because a lot of people don't know it, right? It's sharing that value, sharing that information. Am I right there? Is there something else to it?
I mean, to be honest with you, I thought with my business brain, I'll give you the business answer, was to build lead generation.
Nice.
Now, that was the business side of it, but it hasn't gone that way. It has generated leads for us, and people are working with us because of the podcast, but it's now become a bit more of it's become a different business on its own. So it's now a registered company and everything else, because we're now starting to generate different business from it. So it's
like adverts or something.
Pardon?
Adverts, people paying to be featured on your show.
We've been approached by several companies for sponsorship, which is
Coca-Cola
negotiations. Sadly, not Starbucks though. We've been working on that. No, we will get our coffees paid for. That's all we want, is coffees paid for. We'll be fine. So yeah, we have been spoken to by several companies and approached. So it would be the only thing that we'd really need to do. So we're just completing trademarking on that now, because everything I do gets trademarked for obvious reasons. But it's one of those where we have to do things that, or we have to be open to things that we didn't think was going to happen from it. And now it's, I mean, you saw probably the pictures from the Northampton Expo. One of the biggest parts of our stand was our podcast.
Yeah, I saw that.
People now know us for. So it's really good. But again, just be open to what that looks like, because again, it is completely unexpected. We had no idea the volume of listeners we were going to get. And we haven't advertised it. It's not been pushed out to people. It is just us talking about it, and the quality of the show has excelled itself. So if you focus on the quality rather than the quantity, because I know people that would just go and binge episodes and they'll record masses, and they're exhausted by the end of that day. And that wouldn't really work for us, because we're not coming up or turning up and showing up in the way that we would normally. It would just sound really odd if we mass produced it. So it's 12 episodes a year. That's it, no more, no less. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So we've just gone in for we've just signed for an extra 12 months. So we're staying at our home of Horizon Radio, which we're
celebrations. Congratulations.
Yes, and we're also celebrating our 5th year in business this month, which has been incredible. So we are, I say we because it's not me. Yes, I might own the business, but at the same time, it's very much a collective effort. Without Chris, we wouldn't have the show. Without Faye, we wouldn't have a show. You'd just have me harping on. So again, it's all about the dynamic. If people have listened to it, it's great. If it's their cup of tea, wonderful. But if it's not, it doesn't matter. And when people think about marketing and putting themselves out there, they're quite nervous. People will just scroll on. If you're there, they'll stop and read. If it's not, don't worry about them because they're not the people that matter. The people that matter are the ones that engage with you, that cheerlead you and support you. And Faye and I are very lucky to be surrounded by supporters. Yes, we've received negative comments and saying, well, you guys are just out there to get money and to be there for the employer. Well, actually, they haven't obviously listened to it. They've just wanted to comment something negative. So just don't pay attention to too much of that. If anyone's ever been subjected to that, it's sadly becoming more rife on LinkedIn, which I find. I just block them and move on. So there's no need that you haven't got enough time or energy for that. So no, keep the positivity going.
Amen to that. Well, I'm touched and honoured that you've come onto the show because earlier on you were saying if someone presents an opportunity to you, you have to figure out whether or not it's worth your time. So
everybody has to do that. And
everyone has to do that, and I'm grateful that you've come onto my show. I'm touched.
Thank you. No, that's really. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm delighted that some nuggets of wisdom have helped. And more than happy to have any future conversations as well, Nick. So thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolutely. I'm going to wrap things up now because we both have meetings to get to.
Very busy people.
Yeah. All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you for joining me today, Natalie. For those of you listening along at home, the podcast is called Unboxed HR. HR Unboxed.
HR Unboxed, yeah.
HR Unboxed. I have been listening. So go and check it out. And in the meantime, get marketing, because without marketing, there's no sales. And without sales, there's no business. So get marketing.
Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Marketing Made Easy for HR Consultants podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, then please consider taking a minute to help us grow by sharing the episode with a friend or colleague, or by leaving a positive review on podchaser.com. And make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming episodes if you haven't done so already. I've been your host, Nick Brinsky, and if you've got any questions or you want to know more about today's topic, then feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be delighted to hear from you. See you next time.